The birth of a nation, America's fight for freedom. Scene 1. The spark of rebellion. In the year 1765, across the vast Atlantic coast of North America, 13 colonies quietly simmered under the iron fist of the British Empire. These were not foreign lands of conquest. These were communities of farmers, merchants, teachers, men and women who had built something extraordinary from raw wilderness. They had cleared forests, raised families, and forged lives governed by a single powerful belief that no man should be ruled without his consent. But then came the Stamp Act, a tax imposed without the colonists ever casting a single vote. Letters, newspapers, legal documents, everything now carried the weight of British demand. In the taverns of Boston, in the drawing rooms of Philadelphia, and on the farms of Virginia, one phrase rose like thunder: no taxation without representation. This was not just a slogan. This was a declaration of identity, a people discovering, for the very first time, exactly who they were. Scene 2. The Sons of Liberty. From the chaos of discontent, a secret organization was born. They called themselves the Sons of Liberty, and their mission was nothing less than revolution. Samuel Adams, a firebrand writer and master organizer, became their voice. He wrote pamphlets that traveled from colony to colony like wildfire, turning quiet farmers into passionate patriots. They met under the Liberty Tree in Boston, a massive elm that became the symbol of resistance. Here they swore an oath not to the king, but to each other and to freedom. The British saw them as criminals and traitors. The colonists saw them as heroes, and in that difference of perspective lay the seeds of a nation. When the British tried to silence them with even heavier taxes, the Townshend Acts of 1767, the Sons of Liberty answered with organized boycotts, shutting down British trade across the colonies. Ordinary people, women especially, organized the Daughters of Liberty, spinning their own cloth and brewing their own tea, refusing British goods with quiet, powerful defiance. Scene 3. The Boston Massacre. March 5, 1770. The streets of Boston were frozen with winter cold, but the hearts of its people burned with rage. British soldiers had been stationed in the city to enforce the hated Townshend Acts. Every day was a confrontation waiting to happen. That night, a crowd gathered outside the custom house, throwing snowballs and taunting the red-coated soldiers. The tension was unbearable. Then, a shot rang out, then another. When the smoke cleared, 5 colonists lay dead on the snow-covered cobblestones. Their names were Christmas Addicts, Samuel Gray, James Caldwell, Samuel Maverick, and Patrick Carr. Paul Revere immortalized the scene in a famous engraving that spread throughout the colonies. What the British called a necessary response to a mob, the colonists called a massacre. The Boston Massacre became the greatest recruiting tool the patriot cause ever had. 5 deaths would eventually lead to a revolution that shook the world. Scene 4. The Boston Tea Party. They could tax that paper, they could tax their glass, but when the British Parliament dared to tax their tea, the most beloved drink in every colonial household, they had gone too far. December 16, 1773, the harbor of Boston was still and dark. Then, quietly, about 116 men disguised as Mohawk Indians made their way to Griffin's Wharf. They boarded 3 ships, the Dartmouth, the Eleanor, and the Beaver, and over the course of 3 hours dumped 342 chests of East India Company tea into the cold black water of Boston Harbor. The sound of splintering wood and splashing tea echoed through the night. Not a single other item on those ships was damaged. Not a single man was harmed. The message was precise, deliberate, and unmistakable. We will not be taxed. We will not comply. We are free men. The British Parliament was furious. They passed the Coercive Acts, which the colonists immediately named the Intolerable Acts, closing Boston Harbor and stripping Massachusetts of self-governance. They wanted submission. They got revolution. Scene 5. The First Continental Congress. For the first time in history, representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies gathered in Philadelphia. It was September of 1774, and America was about to discover it had a voice. 56 delegates, lawyers, planters, merchants, sat together in Carpenter's Hall. Among them were men whose names would echo through centuries: George Washington, John Adams, Patrick Henry. Patrick Henry rose to speak, and his words silenced the room. The distinctions between Virginians, Pennsylvanians, New Yorkers, and New Englanders are no more. I am not a Virginian, but an American. They were not yet calling for independence, but they were organizing, they were planning, and they were declaring, quietly and firmly, that they would stand together. They drafted a Declaration of Rights and petitioned the king, demanding repeal of the intolerable acts. The king ignored them. And in that silence, in that royal dismissal of an entire people's plea, was born something unstoppable, something that would change the world forever.
Scene 6. The Shot Heard Round the World. April 18th, 1775. Paul Revere mounted his horse in the dead of night and rode through sleeping towns, crying out his warning, "The regulars are out! The regulars are out!" By dawn, 77 Minutemen, farmers who had volunteered to be ready to fight at a minute's notice, stood on Lexington Green, facing hundreds of British regulars in their crisp red coats. Nobody knows who fired first, but a single shot, that one anonymous, defiant shot, broke the silence of the early morning and changed the course of human history. The colonists fell back at Lexington, but at Concord Bridge they stood their ground. The British, for the first time, turned and ran. As the redcoats retreated along Battle Road back to Boston, colonial militiamen fired at them from behind stone walls and trees, a new kind of warfare that the professional British Army had never encountered. The American Revolution had begun, not with a declaration, not with a debate, but with the courage of ordinary people who refused, absolutely refused, to back down. Scene 7. Thomas Paine and Common Sense. On January 10, 1776, a 47-page pamphlet appeared in the streets of Philadelphia. Its title were two of the most powerful words ever printed in America: common sense. Written by Thomas Paine, a recently arrived English immigrant with a sharp pen and an even sharper mind, it argued something that many colonists had been afraid to say out loud: complete independence from Britain. Paine wrote not for the educated elite, but for the common person. His language was direct, his arguments were clear, and his passion was undeniable. There is something absurd, he wrote, in supposing a continent to be perpetually governed by an island. That single sentence captured exactly what millions of colonists had been feeling. Within 3 months, 120,000 copies had been sold across the colonies. In proportion to the population, it remains the best-selling American title of all time. Common sense did not start the revolution, but it gave the revolution its purpose, its vocabulary, and its soul. After Paine, there could be no turning back. Scene 8. The Declaration of Independence. In the sweltering summer of 1776, 56 men gathered in Philadelphia with a document that would shake the foundations of every empire on earth. Thomas Jefferson, a 33-year-old Virginia planter and lawyer, had spent 17 days writing it. The Declaration of Independence was not just a political document, it was a philosophical revolution. Its opening words announced a new age. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. No government in history had ever declared the rights of ordinary people to be more important than the power of kings. On July 4, 1776, the Continental Congress voted to adopt the Declaration. Bells rang across Philadelphia, crowds filled the streets, men wept, women cheered, children waved their hats. Across the ocean, King George read those words and saw them for exactly what they were: a death sentence for the old world order. The American experiment had begun. Scene 9. Valley Forge, the darkest hour. The Declaration was signed, but declaring freedom and winning it were two very different things. The winter of 1777 to 1778 brought George Washington and his Continental Army to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. What happened there would either kill the revolution or forge it into something unbreakable. 12,000 men camped in crude wooden huts in temperatures that dropped to below zero. 2,000 of them died, not from battle wounds, but from cold, starvation, and disease. Washington walked among his men every day. He saw them wrapping their feet in rags because there were no boots. He saw them eating fire cake, a tasteless mixture of flour and water, because there was no food. And yet, they stayed. Through all of it, they stayed, because they believed in something larger than their own comfort and survival. Valley Forge was the crucible. The men who emerged from that winter were no longer volunteers and farmers. They were soldiers, they were Americans, and they were ready to win. Scene 10. Victory and the Birth of a Nation. From Valley Forge emerged a different army. Under the training of Baron Friedrich von Sieben, a Prussian military officer who had volunteered to help the American cause, the Continental Army became a professional fighting force.
With the critical alliance of France, convinced by Benjamin Franklin's brilliant diplomacy, American forces gained access to a powerful navy, experienced soldiers, and the resources needed to fight a world power. On October 19, 1781, British General Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, Virginia. His band played a song called "The World Turned Upside Down," because it had been. 2 years later, the Treaty of Paris formally recognized the United States of America as an independent nation. For the first time in history, a colonial people had successfully broken free from a European empire through revolution. The Constitution followed, then the Bill of Rights, and in the simple but immortal words carved into the fabric of a new government, "We, the people." They were farmers and merchants, teachers and lawyers, men and women of every background, united by a single impossible dream, and they had done it. Against every odd, against every power, against history itself, they had built something the world had never seen before. They had built America. And the story, their story, had only just begun.